Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sound of clattering trays, the smell of something boiling in the cafeteria kitchen, and a lunch lady calling your name. For millions of American kids in the 1950s, that was daily life. And the meals they ate were unlike anything we see today. Post-war America was a time of rationing, experimentation, and practicality. Schools worked with whatever was cheap, filling, and available, from surplus government supplies to strange home recipes packed lovingly into lunchboxes. Nutrition standards were very different, and what was considered healthy often feels downright bizarre to us now. But behind every odd sandwich or mystery stew was a story of frugality, tradition, and the unique flavor of mid-century childhood. These lunches weren't just meals, they were snapshots of a time when America was changing rapidly, and families made do with what they had. And while many of these foods would make kids today wrinkle their noses, for the children of the 1950s, they were a taste of home, a sense of belonging, and sometimes a memory that still lingers more than the flavor ever did. So join us as we take a look back at 25 strange and unforgettable school lunches that kids ate in 1950s America. Some you may remember fondly, others you might be glad stayed in the past. Imagine opening your lunchbox in 1954, peeling back the wax paper, and finding a thick slab of pink, salty Spam sitting between two slices of white Wonder Bread. For many kids, this wasn't just lunch, it was a taste of post-war America. Spam had exploded in popularity during World War II, where it was shipped overseas by the millions to feed American soldiers. By the 1950s, it had firmly cemented itself as an American staple. Cheap, shelf-stable, and easy to slice, it was the perfect answer for families trying to stretch their grocery budgets in the booming, but still frugal, post-war years. Parents saw Spam sandwiches as quick, protein-packed meals that fit neatly into school lunchboxes wrapped in wax paper or foil. For kids, the taste was divisive. Some loved the salty, meaty flavor and looked forward to Spam Day, while others dreaded the oily sheen that stained their bread. Cafeterias often served it fried in thick slices or diced up with mustard, giving it just enough zest to be memorable. Spam symbolized a new era of convenience foods, processed, affordable, and available everywhere. It was a reflection of a changing America, where practicality often won over taste. But here's the twist: while Spam was considered a treat by many American children, it was also ridiculed by others, who saw it as poor man's meat. Kids unlucky enough to unpack a Spam sandwich in the cafeteria often faced teasing. What once fed soldiers overseas now became a lunchtime battleground in the schoolyard. Still, love it or hate it, Spam sandwiches became one of the most iconic and strange lunches of 1950s America. And if Spam sandwiches weren't unusual enough, some kids found an even stranger combination waiting for them: peanut butter and mayonnaise, mashed together on soft white bread. Now, if you thought Spam was a little unusual, wait until you hear this, because in the 1950s, thousands of schoolchildren across America opened their lunchboxes to find a sandwich slathered with peanut butter and mayonnaise. The recipe actually dates back to the Great Depression, when families stretched every ingredient to the limit. Peanut butter was cheap, filling, and packed with protein, while mayonnaise added moisture and fat that made even the driest bread go down easier. By the 1950s, the combination had become a quirky but surprisingly common staple in lunchboxes, especially across the South. Parents often saw it as practical, thrifty, and nutritious, even if it sounded strange. Kids had mixed reactions. Some swore the tangy creaminess of mayonnaise actually balanced the stickiness of peanut butter, creating what they considered a smooth and rich flavor. Others found it revolting, refusing to take more than one bite. But for working-class families, the sandwich was cheap, easy, and provided energy for a long school day. It wasn't just about taste, it was about survival and simplicity, at a time when convenience foods were reshaping the American diet. The shocking part: for many who grew up in the 1950s, this was considered normal. Generations later, the peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich is treated like a bizarre relic of the past, laughed at in recipe forums and treated like a dare food. Yet, for the children who grew up eating them, it was simply lunch, no stranger than bologna or egg salad. And believe it or not, some people today still defend the combo as a forgotten comfort food. But peanut butter wasn't the only bold flavor kids had to face. Some school lunches packed an even more intense punch, with sandwiches stacked with strong-smelling liverwurst. Picture a crowded 1950s cafeteria, and the unmistakable smell of liverwurst drifting through the air. For some kids, this sandwich was a badge of pride, but for others, it was the lunch that cleared the table. Liverwurst, a type of liver sausage with German origins, was extremely popular in mid-20th century America. Immigrant communities had embraced it for decades, and by the 1950s, it was available in nearly every grocery store deli. Parents considered it inexpensive, nutrient-rich, and easy to slice. Spread thick on white bread, often with mustard or pickles, it became a common lunchbox choice. To parents, this was a healthy, hearty sandwich. To kids, though, the smell and texture could be overwhelming. Liverwurst reflected a bigger theme of the 1950s, the blending of immigrant traditions into mainstream American life. For families with German, Polish, or Eastern European roots, it wasn't strange at all, it was comfort food. But for children unfamiliar with it, the bold flavor and strong aroma made liverwurst sandwiches the most controversial food in the lunchroom. Some kids loved it, while others couldn't even sit near it. The twist. In some cafeterias, liverwurst sandwiches sparked social divides. Kids who brought them often got teased for having weird food, even though liverwurst was sold nationwide. For some, the smell was embarrassing enough to make them trade or hide their lunch. Yet today, liverwurst has become a rare delicacy, something you might only find in specialty delis. What was once a common sandwich in a 1950s lunchbox is now nearly forgotten, remembered only by those who grew up eating it. And if liverwurst was too strong, things didn't get much easier, because the next oddity on our list took an everyday dessert and turned it into a savory cafeteria dish, Jell-O, with vegetables. It's one of the strangest sights in a 1950s cafeteria, a wobbly mound of lime Jell-O, shimmering under the fluorescent lights, except instead of fruit inside, it's packed with carrots, peas, or even olives. Gelatin-based dishes exploded in popularity during the mid-20th century. Jell-O was marketed as both modern and fancy, appearing in cookbooks, church suppers, and holiday tables. By the 1950s, homemakers were experimenting with savory versions, mixing vegetables, mayonnaise, and even meats into gelatin molds. Schools followed suit, often serving Jell-O salads in small portions alongside sandwiches and milk. To administrators, it was an affordable way to add color, texture, and nutrition to a tray. To kids, it was often baffling. At the time, food presentation mattered almost as much as taste. Molded gelatin salads were seen as stylish, reflecting the optimistic post-war culture that prized innovation and convenience. School cafeterias latched onto this trend, believing they were offering a modern dish. And for families with tight budgets, it was also practical. Jell-O could stretch leftovers, suspend vegetables, and turn simple ingredients into something that looked special. But here's the twist. Most kids hated it. The clash of textures, sweet lime Jell-O with crunchy celery, mushy peas, or tangy olives, created combinations that were more nightmare than treat. For many children, it was the one item on their tray that always went untouched. Today, these recipes are looked back on with disbelief, often shared online as examples of the weirdest foods of the 1950s. Yet, for school children back then, Jell-O salads were a common, if not dreaded, part of lunchtime. And if Jell-O with vegetables didn't leave kids queasy enough, the drink that often came with it wasn't much better. Powdered milk served in wax cartons. Imagine sitting in a noisy 1950s cafeteria, reaching for a small wax carton of milk, only to take a sip and realize it isn't fresh milk at all, but the watery, chalky taste of powdered milk. Powdered milk wasn't new to the 1950s. It had been widely used during World War II when fresh milk was difficult to transport overseas. By the post-war years, many schools continued using it because it was cheaper, easier to store, and didn't spoil as quickly. Cartons of reconstituted powdered milk were a budget-friendly solution for feeding hundreds of kids every day. To school administrators, it was practical. To children, it was anything but appetizing. The idea was rooted in frugality. Post-war America might have been booming, but schools still had limited food budgets. Powdered milk meant they could stretch resources while meeting nutritional standards. It was served in the classic wax-coated cartons of the time, making it look just like real milk, until the first sip gave it away. Some kids tolerated it, while others couldn't finish even half the carton. For many, it left an unforgettable aftertaste that lingered far longer than lunch. The shocking part: entire generations grew up drinking powdered milk at school without realizing why. For many children, it was their only option, and complaints often fell on deaf ears. Today, powdered milk is mostly associated with emergency rations or camping, but in the 1950s, it was a daily reality for school children across America. That little wax carton promised comfort, but too often delivered disappointment. And if you thought powdered milk was bad, some kids were greeted with something even stranger inside their sandwiches: deviled ham spread straight from a tin. Picture peeling back the lid of a small, sharp-edged tin can, revealing a mushy pink paste with a fiery little devil stamped on the label. That was deviled ham, and in the 1950s, many kids found it tucked between two slices of bread in their school lunches. Deviled ham wasn't a new invention. The Underwood Company had been making it since the 1860s, and by the mid-20th century, its little red devil logo was one of the most recognizable food brands in America. Cheap, shelf-stable, and easy to spread, deviled ham became a pantry staple, especially in working-class homes. In school cafeterias, it meant sandwiches could be made quickly and stored without spoiling too fast. The creamy, spiced ham spread was considered convenient protein for growing children. In an era before refrigeration was everywhere, deviled ham offered a safe way to feed kids meat without worrying it would go bad. For some, the salty, tangy flavor was a welcome change from the usual peanut butter or bologna sandwich. But for many children, the mushy texture and strong smell made it a dreaded lunchtime surprise. The sight of that little red devil on the can became burned into memory, both for those who loved it and those who hated it. The shocking part is how long-lasting this tradition was. The same red devil logo still exists today, making it one of the oldest food trademarks in American history. For many who grew up in the 1950s, deviled ham sandwiches weren't just food, they were a symbol of an era when convenience often outweighed taste. Kids might not have appreciated the strange spread at the time, but looking back, those little cans were a reminder of a nation still figuring out how to feed its children in a modern, efficient way. And speaking of meat that didn't quite look like meat, the next strange school lunch came in a pale square form, straight from the can: luncheon meat. Picture the moment a dozen metal lunch pails click open at once, and the lunchroom fills with a sharp, steamy wave of cabbage. For some 1950s kids, a thermos of hot cabbage soup meant comfort. For others, it meant instant embarrassment. After the 1946 National School Lunch Act, more cafeterias offered hot meals, but plenty of children still brought food from home. The glass-lined vacuum thermos became the era's portable stovetop, carrying everything from tomato soup to leftover stews. Cabbage soup rode in on thrift and tradition, inexpensive, filling, and common in immigrant households with Eastern European roots. A pot could stretch all week: potatoes, onions, a bit of pork or sausage if you had it, and ladle neatly into a thermos each morning before the school bell. Cabbage soup was practical: cheap vegetables, lots of liquid, real warmth on a cold walk to school. Parents prized it for sticking power, believing a hot, savory lunch kept kids alert through afternoon lessons. And the thermos itself symbolized care. Someone at home had heated the stove, seasoned the pot, and poured it carefully so the glass liner wouldn't crack. In a decade that celebrated convenience, this was still hands-on cooking traveling to school in a tin and plastic capsule. But nostalgia cuts both ways. The same aroma that said, home, to one child could spell social disaster to another. A single twist of a thermos cap could perfume an entire table. Giggles followed, along with trades for peanut butter or bologna. Many adults today can still summon that cabbage cloud, equal parts love and mortification. What's striking is how a humble soup revealed the lunchroom's unwritten rules: thrift versus status, tradition versus conformity. For better or worse, that thermos told a story long before the first spoonful. And speaking of surprising pairings, the next sandwich took sweetness to a slippery extreme: bananas married to mayonnaise on fluffy white bread. Imagine peeling a ripe banana, slicing it, and then smearing mayonnaise across 2 slices of Wonder Bread. To many kids in the 1950s, this wasn't a dare, it was lunch. Bananas had been a symbol of modern abundance since the early 20th century, thanks to refrigerated shipping and advertising campaigns. They were cheap, available year-round, and promoted as a health fruit packed with energy. Mayonnaise, meanwhile, became a staple condiment in the 1950s pantry, marketed as versatile and wholesome. Together, they represented the collision of convenience and nutrition messaging in mid-century America. Families, especially in the South, embraced the banana and mayo sandwich as quick, filling, and inexpensive. Some households even considered it a special treat, a quirky balance of sweet and savory. Kids didn't think in terms of food trends, they just ate what mom packed. To a child, this sandwich meant soft textures, creamy sweetness, and a full belly until dinner. Parents liked it because bananas were nutritious and mayonnaise added calories, ensuring kids stayed energized. In an age when processed foods were booming, this sandwich was oddly homemade, just fruit and a condiment. It was portable, affordable, and easy to assemble in seconds, which mattered for busy households juggling post-war routines. But not every child loved this sticky pairing. Imagine opening your lunchbox to reveal a mushy banana pressed against mayo-soaked bread, while classmates stared in disbelief. Some kids traded it away immediately, others defended it fiercely as comfort food. For those who grew up with it, the memory still sparks nostalgia today, while others shudder at the thought. In many ways, the banana and mayo sandwich sums up the 1950s lunchroom perfectly: equal parts practicality, experimentation, and cultural quirkiness. And if bananas and mayonnaise weren't adventurous enough, the next item took the humble hot dog and reinvented it in a very 1950s way. Take a hot dog, slice it down the middle, wrap it in white bread, maybe add a squirt of ketchup or a slice of cheese, and you've got a 1950s cafeteria invention: the hot dog roll-up. The hot dog was already America's casual meal darling by the mid-20th century, especially after World War II, when processed meats became more affordable and widely distributed. Families embraced them at cookouts, ball games, and yes, even at school. But cafeterias often had to stretch budgets, and full buns weren't always available or cost-effective. Enter the roll-up, a hot dog wrapped in soft sandwich bread, sometimes baked to crisp the edges, other times served limp and lukewarm. It was a budget-friendly way to give kids the illusion of a treat, while keeping costs down. For children, this lunch felt fun. It was familiar, easy to eat, and didn't require utensils. Some kids enjoyed the do-it-yourself aspect of rolling it up themselves. Others liked the rare splash of ketchup or melted cheese that cafeteria workers would sometimes sneak in. Hot dogs symbolized modern, fast, American food, and this stripped-down version mirrored the rise of convenience culture in the 1950s. Even when soggy, it was better than cabbage soup or powdered milk. Yet, for many kids, the reality was far less appetizing. Picture peeling back wax paper to find a cold, rubbery hot dog wedged inside sticky bread, edges turning stale. The smell alone could fill a cafeteria table with groans. Still, for those who loved it, the hot dog roll-up was a highlight, a little taste of ballpark joy inside a brown bag. Today, it's remembered with a mix of fondness and disbelief, a quirky symbol of how 1950s America balanced thrift with fun. But if hot dog roll-ups seemed a little odd, the next so-called treat really had kids groaning: prune whip cups. Imagine being handed a small paper cup filled with a dark, foamy dessert, labeled as healthy. That was the reality of prune whip cups, a so-called treat that had kids cringing across 1950s America. In the post-war era, nutrition was a national obsession. School cafeterias worked hand in hand with government guidelines to serve meals that were thought to fortify growing bodies. Prunes, long associated with digestive health, were pushed as a wholesome, fiber-rich food. To make them more palatable for children, schools blended them into airy whips with egg whites and sugar, served in waxy paper cups. It was a Depression-era recipe that lingered into the 50s, born out of frugality and a belief in functional eating. For administrators, prune whip ticked all the boxes: cheap, nutrient-dense, easy to prepare in large batches. For parents, it was reassurance that their kids were eating something good for them. And some children, though not many, actually enjoyed the sweet, mousse-like texture. In a world before brightly packaged pudding cups or candy-laden snacks, prune whip was meant to be the school's answer to dessert. But for most kids, prune whip was a nightmare in disguise. Its appearance, brownish, lumpy, and vaguely gelatinous, was enough to turn stomachs. The smell lingered long after the lunch bell, filling cafeterias with an earthy sweetness that didn't sit right with young appetites. Some children quietly traded or tossed theirs, while others braved the spoonfuls under the watchful eye of lunch monitors. Today, it's remembered not with fondness but with disbelief, a strange symbol of the era's obsession with health over taste. And if prune whip didn't do enough to dampen a child's appetite, the next classic cafeteria dish, soggy tuna noodle casserole leftovers, certainly did. Picture this: the lunchroom door swings open, and instantly the smell of reheated fish and soggy noodles fills the air. Kids in the 1950s knew right away, it was tuna noodle casserole day. Tuna noodle casserole became a post-war household staple in America. With canned tuna, condensed cream of mushroom soup, and a topping of breadcrumbs or potato chips, it was cheap, filling, and easy for homemakers to prepare. Naturally, the dish spilled into school cafeterias, where it could be made in massive pans and stretched to feed hundreds of children. But there was a catch. These casseroles were often cooked the night before, refrigerated, and reheated in giant steam tables the next day, turning creamy noodles into mush and leaving the fish with an overpowering scent. For parents and schools alike, tuna casserole represented practicality. It fit perfectly into the frugal, efficiency-driven mindset of the 1950s. Canned tuna was a modern miracle, an affordable protein that could be shipped, stored, and served without spoilage. In theory, it was a balanced meal: protein, starch, and a creamy sauce to make it all go down easier. At a time when food waste was frowned upon, leftovers, especially casseroles, were seen as not just acceptable, but responsible. But for the kids, the reality was far less glamorous. By the time tuna noodle casserole reached their trays, it was often pale, soggy, and lukewarm. The fishy aroma clung to the walls of the cafeteria, embarrassing children who didn't even want to touch it. Some kids would stir it aimlessly with their forks, praying for the bell to ring, while others tried to barter with friends for anything else. Decades later, many adults still shudder at the memory of those reheated tuna leftovers, a dish meant to nourish but remembered instead as one of the strangest, least appetizing lunches of the era. And as if one night's leftovers weren't enough, some kids also faced the heavy, greasy reality of cold meatloaf sandwiches waiting in their lunchboxes. It's hard to forget the feeling of unwrapping wax paper only to find a thick, greasy slab of last night's meatloaf wedged between two slices of Wonder Bread. For many 1950s kids, the dreaded cold meatloaf sandwich was a lunchbox reality. Meatloaf was a Depression-era invention that truly found its stride in post-war America. Families could stretch a pound of ground beef by mixing in breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, and ketchup. It was hearty, affordable, and fed big families. By the 1950s, meatloaf was a dinnertime staple across the country. But leftovers rarely went to waste, and thrifty parents often tucked thick slices into lunchboxes the next morning, creating the infamous cold meatloaf sandwich. Sometimes ketchup or mustard was added, sometimes not, leaving a dense, chewy block of meat pressed into soft white bread. For adults, this was practicality at its finest. Meatloaf was cheap, filling, and packed with protein, everything a growing child supposedly needed. In a decade where frugality and efficiency still shaped household decisions, cold meatloaf sandwiches were considered a smart way to save money and avoid waste. Plus, it reflected the no-nonsense attitude of the era. Food wasn't supposed to be exciting, just nourishing. But for kids, it was another story. Cold meatloaf often turned rubbery, its fat congealed into a pale layer, leaving a smell that clung to classrooms long after lunchtime. Some kids felt embarrassed when their friends pulled out shiny peanut butter sandwiches or neat thermoses of soup, while they were stuck with a gray, greasy slab. Many quietly tossed theirs in the trash, while others tried to scrape the meat away and just eat the bread. To this day, the memory of pulling out a cold meatloaf sandwich is a visceral one for many adults, a reminder of a time when frugality sometimes clashed with childhood appetites. And if meatloaf wasn't pungent enough, the next lunchroom offender took things up a notch: egg salad with way too much mustard. Few things could clear out an entire lunch table faster than the unmistakable smell of egg salad. And when the 1950s cafeteria ladle got a little heavy on the mustard, the results were unforgettable. Egg salad was a product of practicality. Eggs were cheap, easy to boil in big batches, and widely available in post-war America. Mixing them with mayonnaise created a creamy filling that could stretch across multiple sandwiches. But in the 1950s, mustard became the zingy addition that moms and cafeteria cooks often leaned on to add flavor. Unfortunately, when mustard overpowered the mix, the egg salad turned from a mild lunchtime filler into a nose-stinging, neon yellow spread that dominated the cafeteria air. For thrifty families, egg salad was a reliable standby. Protein-packed and inexpensive, it was considered wholesome and practical. And in the age of post-war efficiency, nothing went to waste. If there were extra hard-boiled eggs, they went straight into sandwiches. Schools also leaned on it because it was quick to prepare for hundreds of students at once. It wasn't meant to be gourmet, it was meant to fill bellies on a budget. But for kids, this was a social nightmare. The pungent smell clung to classrooms long after lunch, leaving many embarrassed to even open their wax paper-wrapped sandwich. The overly tangy taste of mustard only made things worse, leading some kids to quietly toss theirs away or trade for something less offensive. And yet, others developed a fond nostalgia for the messy, bright yellow sandwiches, remembering them as one of the few times their lunches had personality. Love it or hate it, egg salad with too much mustard was one of the most unforgettable staples of mid-century American school lunch culture. But if you thought egg salad smelled bad, the next dish brought sweetness and tang in a way that confused just about every child: cottage cheese with pineapple. Sweet and tangy pineapple, sitting right on top of a scoop of lumpy cottage cheese. This was the 1950s idea of a balanced treat, and kids had no choice but to face it. In the post-war years, America was obsessed with health, vitamins, and efficiency. Cottage cheese was promoted heavily as a high-protein, low-fat food that could keep families strong. At the same time, canned pineapple became a popular pantry item, thanks to companies like Dole marketing it as exotic yet accessible. It didn't take long before dietitians, school lunch planners, and homemakers thought to combine the two: creamy, savory curds of cottage cheese with syrupy, bright pineapple chunks. On paper, it was nutritious, a blend of dairy and fruit. On the tray, it was puzzling. This dish was part of the era's push toward scientific eating. Nutrition guides of the 1950s often highlighted food pairings that might sound odd today but were considered wholesome then. Pineapple was rich in vitamin C, cottage cheese in protein and calcium. Together, they were meant to deliver a balanced bite that ticked all the health boxes. For cafeteria planners, it was also cheap, easy to serve in bulk, and didn't require much cooking. It was considered modern and forward-thinking, a far cry from the heavy, greasy foods of the Depression era. But for kids, it was far from appealing. Many couldn't stand the sour-sweet clash or the texture of wet curds against juicy pineapple. To a child's taste buds, it was more punishment than health boost. Some remember trying to hide the dish under a napkin or dumping it in the trash when teachers weren't looking. Yet others, often influenced by their mothers serving the same thing at home, grew to love it, remembering the dish as a symbol of mid-century American optimism. Cottage cheese with pineapple was less about flavor and more about the era's faith that nutrition and progress could be spooned onto a tray. Still, if you thought pineapple and cottage cheese was strange, wait until you hear about the ultimate budget lunch, bologna with ketchup, a sandwich that defined 1950s simplicity. It was cheap, quick, and almost always squished flat in a brown bag, the humble bologna and ketchup sandwich. To some kids, it was comfort. To others, it was barely edible. In the 1950s, bologna was everywhere. It was inexpensive, easy to slice, and mass-produced by companies like Oscar Mayer. Families trying to stretch $1 leaned on it heavily, and children carried the evidence in their lunchboxes. While mustard was the more traditional companion to bologna, ketchup often took its place, especially in homes where kids insisted on sweeter flavors. The result was a simple sandwich of white bread, a few slices of bologna, and a squirt of ketchup. No lettuce, no cheese, no frills. The sandwich reflected post-war frugality and efficiency. Parents wanted something filling but cheap, and kids wanted something familiar. Bologna was seen as all-American, and ketchup, marketed as both a condiment and even a vegetable in school lunch guidelines, gave it just enough sweetness to win over picky eaters. It was also incredibly portable, making it a lunchbox staple across the country. For cafeterias and homemakers alike, it was a no-fuss solution. But here's the truth: not every kid loved it. The combination of processed bologna and sugary ketchup often turned into a sticky, soggy mess by noon. Some remember peeling the bread off because the ketchup had soaked through, leaving a pink stain behind. Others recall trading away their bologna sandwich for almost anything else. And yet, for many children, it was the taste of childhood, a reminder of simpler times when lunch was never gourmet, but always memorable. The bologna and ketchup sandwich remains a snapshot of 1950s practicality, where flavor took a back seat to thrift. Of course, not every simple option was bad. Sometimes kids were thrilled to see a bright little cup of canned fruit cocktail waiting on their tray. Every child knew the feeling, opening a cafeteria tray and spotting that little paper or tin cup filled with syrupy fruit cocktail, always colorful, always sticky, and always with just one lonely cherry floating on top. In the 1950s, canned fruit cocktail was marketed as a modern convenience. Instead of peeling, slicing, or dealing with fresh fruit, parents and schools could open a can and instantly have a serving ready to go. These cocktails usually contained diced peaches, pears, grapes, and pineapple chunks, mixed together in heavy syrup. Packaged in small cups or scooped straight from industrial-sized cans, it became a staple in both school cafeterias and home-packed lunches. The fruit cocktail fit the mid-century fascination with processed foods, where easy and quick often meant better. For kids, the fruit cocktail cup was one of the few sweet notes in an otherwise salty or savory lunch. It broke up the monotony of sandwiches and casseroles. Parents felt good about including it too. After all, it was fruit, even if drenched in syrup. The presentation also mattered. The bright little cup added color to trays otherwise dominated by beige and gray foods, giving the illusion of freshness. And in a time when produce wasn't as accessible year-round, canned fruit felt like a luxury, even if it came from a can. But here's the part everyone remembers: there was always just one cherry. One small, bright red maraschino cherry, sitting like treasure in a sea of mushy diced fruit. Kids either scrambled to eat it first or saved it for last. And if their cup didn't have a cherry at all, well, that was a cafeteria tragedy. To many, the fruit cocktail wasn't really about the fruit at all. It was about that one cherry. And for some, that tiny burst of red sweetness is what made the entire lunch worth remembering. But not every 1950s lunchbox treat was sweet. Sometimes kids opened their sandwich to find something far more shocking: a slice of beef tongue. Imagine biting into your sandwich at school only to realize it wasn't bologna, it wasn't ham, it wasn't even roast beef. It was beef tongue. Yes, actual slices of cow tongue layered between two pieces of white bread. Beef tongue has been part of traditional diets for centuries, especially in immigrant households where nothing from the animal went to waste. By the 1950s, tongue was still fairly common in butcher shops and delis, often sold pre-cooked, sliced, and ready for sandwiches. Some parents saw it as affordable protein, while others considered it a delicacy. But for children in post-war America, used to more familiar cold cuts, beef tongue in a lunchbox was often met with raised eyebrows or pinched noses. In certain families, especially those with roots in Eastern European, Jewish, or Hispanic communities, beef tongue sandwiches weren't strange at all. It was hearty, flavorful, and nutritious. For frugal parents, it was a way to stretch the family's food budget, since tongue was cheaper than more popular cuts of beef. For some kids, it even became a comfort food, something that reminded them of home cooking. But inside the cafeteria, it was a very different story. When a child unwrapped their lunch only to find beef tongue, classmates often reacted with horror. After all, this wasn't just meat. You could literally see the rough texture of the tongue slices. Some kids proudly ate it, while others tried to trade it away, or simply tossed it. To this day, many who grew up in the 1950s remember beef tongue sandwiches as the ultimate love it or hate it lunch. For some, it was a taste of heritage. For others, it was pure embarrassment. But while beef tongue shocked kids with its unusual texture, another sandwich surprised them in an entirely different way, with an odd mix of salty, sour, and nutty. Sweet, salty, sour, and nutty, all in one bite. The peanut butter and pickle sandwich was one of those strange combinations that could either make you gag or turn into a lifelong craving. Peanut butter sandwiches had already been a staple in American households since the 1920s, especially after the invention of pre-sliced bread. By the 1950s, peanut butter was everywhere, affordable, filling, and kid-friendly. But parents and cafeteria cooks often looked for ways to jazz it up. Enter pickles. With their briny crunch, they were a cheap pantry staple, and when layered into a peanut butter sandwich, they created an unusual flavor contrast that quickly gained a following. Some families swore by dill pickles, while others insisted sweet pickles were the only way to go. It may sound strange today, but the peanut butter and pickle sandwich was a quirky example of 1950s resourcefulness. Families were still cautious with money, and this combo was both cheap and packed with calories. Kids didn't always appreciate it, but many adults saw it as clever, something different from the ordinary peanut butter and jelly. And surprisingly, the mixture of creamy, nutty peanut butter with tangy pickles created a flavor balance that some found irresistible. Of course, not everyone was a fan. Some kids proudly unwrapped their peanut butter and pickle sandwiches, only to face disgusted looks from their classmates. Others begged their parents never to pack it again. Yet, decades later, this oddball sandwich still has a cult following, with people online swearing it's an underrated classic. For kids of the 1950s, though, it was one of the strangest lunches you could pull out of your brown paper bag. And while peanut butter and pickles divided the lunchroom, another cheap meat made its way back into the spotlight, this time fried, curled, and sizzling. For many kids in the 1950s, the sound of bologna sizzling in a frying pan wasn't just breakfast, it was tomorrow's school lunch. And when those slices curled up into little meat cups, they became a lunchbox staple nobody could forget. Bologna was cheap, versatile, and practically everywhere in mid-century America. It was the working family's cold cut of choice, and when leftovers were fried, the thin slices puffed and curled into strange little bowls. Housewives found it economical, and kids often discovered these crispy circles tucked between bread slices the next day. With meat rationing still a recent memory, nothing went to waste, and bologna was the perfect filler food for a growing child's lunch. Fried bologna sandwiches became a symbol of thrifty cooking in the 1950s. The smoky, salty flavor gave plain white bread some personality, and a little ketchup or mustard made it feel like a special sandwich. For children, it wasn't always glamorous, but it was filling, and more exciting than a plain cold bologna slice. In many ways, this was comfort food born from practicality. Of course, not every kid appreciated it. Opening a lunchbox to reveal a greasy, cold fried bologna circle wasn't exactly envy-inducing. Some kids turned red as classmates teased them about the meat cups in their sandwiches. Yet, for others, the crispy edges and smoky taste created a nostalgia that still lingers decades later. What was once just a cheap filler has since become a quirky comfort food, with fried bologna sandwiches making comebacks at diners and fairs across America. But if fried bologna raised eyebrows, the next cafeteria dish was even more mysterious, an endless pot of soup with floating vegetables no one could quite identify. Every school cafeteria in 1950s America seemed to have one constant, a giant steaming pot of vegetable soup. But what was actually floating in that broth? Well, that was anybody's guess. School cafeterias were still adjusting to post-war budgets and the rise of mass feeding programs. Soup was cheap, filling, and could be made in enormous batches. Leftover vegetables, canned goods, and even scraps from previous meals often found their way into the pot. The result was a watery broth that varied wildly from one day to the next. Kids could expect carrots, peas, potatoes, or beans, but sometimes they found puzzling additions, bits of meat, limp cabbage, or unidentifiable floating chunks that defied explanation. For schools, this soup was a lifesaver. It stretched food supplies, kept costs low, and ensured children had something warm in their stomachs during the school day. For many working-class families, this bowl of soup might have been the heartiest meal their child ate until dinner. The government's push for balanced nutrition also meant vegetables were heavily emphasized, even if kids weren't thrilled about them. But to the kids themselves, it was a different story. Some swore the soup never tasted the same twice, and rumors spread about what exactly was in it. Mystery meat jokes began long before the TV dinner era, and kids often poked suspiciously at the floating chunks before daring to take a bite. Yet despite the skepticism, that bowl of cafeteria soup became a shared memory, a symbol of both thrift and survival in an era where nothing went to waste. And while the soup may have been questionable, the next dish was unmistakably a hand-me-down from America's military kitchens: creamed chipped beef on toast. For many kids in the 1950s, lunch came with a strange military twist: a thick, salty pile of creamed chipped beef served over toast. To some, it was comfort food. To others, it was simply known by its infamous nickname, SOS. Creamed chipped beef had its roots in the U.S. military, especially during World War II. Soldiers were served it frequently because it was cheap, easy to prepare in bulk, and shelf-stable. Dried beef was rehydrated, chopped, and simmered in a white cream gravy, then ladled over toast. After the war, the dish made its way into American homes and eventually into school cafeterias, carried along by both veterans who had grown used to it and government surplus food programs that supplied schools. In a time when stretching budgets was critical, chipped beef on toast made sense. It was filling, it used affordable ingredients, and it could feed a lot of hungry kids without costing schools too much. Some children grew to like its savory flavor and creamy texture, especially if they had family members who ate it at home. To many parents, it represented both practicality and patriotism, a connection to the sacrifices of wartime America. But kids often had another opinion. The nickname SOS, short for stuff on a shingle, though soldiers had a far less polite version, hinted at how it was really received. Many found it bland, heavy, and unappetizing, a far cry from the sandwiches and casseroles they preferred. Still, it became a lunchtime staple, one that kids across the nation remembered, whether with a shudder or a smile. It wasn't just food, it was a reminder that even in peace, the cafeteria carried echoes of war. And from a salty soldier's breakfast to something sweet, sticky, and often lukewarm, we now move on to the curious case of rice pudding with raisins. It arrived in little bowls, thick and lumpy, with a few shriveled raisins floating on top. For many children of the 1950s, rice pudding wasn't a sweet treat, it was a dreaded surprise that showed up again and again in the cafeteria line. Rice pudding had deep roots in American kitchens long before it made its way into school lunchrooms. Cheap to make, easy to stretch, and often considered comfort food, it became a thrifty option for schools feeding hundreds of children on tight budgets. Recipes from the 1940s and 50s often recommended milk, sugar, and leftover rice, sometimes even powdered milk when fresh wasn't available. Raisins were added as an inexpensive way to dress it up, but in practice, they often sank to the bottom, leaving kids with bland spoonfuls of mush before finding a chewy raisin surprise. For many administrators and parents, rice pudding represented nourishment and thrift, a way to give children energy without wasting food. It was marketed as wholesome, filling, and even dessert-like. Yet for the children themselves, it rarely delivered on that promise. Too often, it was lukewarm by the time it reached the table, the texture sticky or clumpy, and the raisins too tough to chew. To adults, it was economical. To kids, it was cafeteria punishment disguised as pudding. The real divide came in the cafeteria itself. Some children stirred sugar from their milk carton into the pudding, trying to sweeten it into something enjoyable. Others simply pushed it aside, the smell and texture too unappetizing to stomach. What's shocking is that rice pudding became a kind of quiet battleground, half the room forcing it down, the other half refusing to touch it. And for many, the memory of that pale, lumpy dessert has lingered far longer than the taste ever did. And just when kids thought lunch couldn't get any stranger, the cafeteria had another surprise waiting. This time, not a dessert, but a sandwich filled with olives and cream cheese. Imagine opening your lunchbox in the 1950s and finding a sandwich that was neither sweet nor savory, but something oddly in between, cream cheese and olives. For many kids, this was the ultimate love it or hate it lunch. The 1950s were a time when cream cheese was making its way into almost every American kitchen. It was affordable, spreadable, and endlessly versatile. Housewives, influenced by magazines like Good Housekeeping and Better Homes and Gardens, experimented with fancier fillings for their children's sandwiches. Olives, considered exotic, European, and even elegant, became a trendy ingredient. When chopped and folded into cream cheese, they created a salty, tangy spread that stood out from the usual peanut butter or ham. For mothers trying to give their kids something that felt special, this sandwich seemed like a clever choice. This odd pairing was seen as a middle-class upgrade, a touch of sophistication packed between two slices of Wonder Bread. In an era when appearances mattered, moms wanted their kids to enjoy foods that hinted at refinement. Some children genuinely enjoyed the salty punch of the olives against the smooth cream cheese, while others tolerated it because it was different from the monotonous rotation of tuna or bologna. But for many schoolchildren, this was the dreaded sandwich, the one you tried to trade away at the lunch table, only to be met with wrinkled noses and laughter. The taste was too sharp, too unfamiliar, and the texture a strange mix of creamy and chewy. For some, that sandwich represented embarrassment, the feeling of being the kid with the weird lunch. Yet for others, it became a memory of comfort, a nostalgic reminder of a mother's attempt at giving them something unique, even if it wasn't always appreciated at the time. And while olives and cream cheese tested kids' palates, another Friday tradition tested their patience, because that's when fish sticks ruled the cafeteria. For many American schoolchildren of the 1950s, Friday didn't just mean the end of the week, it meant fish sticks. Greasy, breaded, and often more filler than fish, these golden rectangles were a ritual in nearly every cafeteria across the country. The tradition of fish on Fridays had deep cultural and religious roots, especially in Catholic communities where meat was avoided on that day. As America's schools worked to serve up affordable, standardized meals to millions of children, fish sticks, introduced commercially in the early 1950s, seemed like the perfect solution. Frozen, cheap, and easy to heat in bulk, they became the go-to Friday lunch. Advertisements promised them as nutritious seafood for modern families, while cafeterias found them convenient to store and serve. To many kids, fish sticks were both a comfort and a disappointment. On one hand, they were crunchy, salty, and often served with ketchup or tartar sauce, making them more fun than cabbage soup or powdered milk. On the other hand, the actual fish inside was often a mystery. A pale, flaky substance pressed into shape, it was rumored among children to be everything from leftovers to mashed-up fish parts. Still, they became a Friday tradition that countless students remembered for the rest of their lives. What makes Fish Stick Fridays so unforgettable isn't just the taste, it's the smell. Entire cafeterias would reek of fried fish, clinging to clothes and lingering long after lunch was over. Some kids dreaded those Fridays, sneaking their fish sticks into napkins or trading them away, while others saw them as a highlight of the week. Either way, for better or worse, the memory of Fish Stick Fridays remains one of the most vivid snapshots of mid-century American school life. But if fish sticks divided kids into lovers and haters, the next lunch item was even stranger, and sometimes downright shocking. Because while fish was common, some children opened their lunchboxes to find something far less familiar: beef tongue sandwiches. Imagine walking into a 1950s school cafeteria and being hit by a smell that was impossible to ignore. For some kids, it was the scent of boiled cabbage and hot dogs, a combination that could turn stomachs before lunch even began. In post-war America, frugality was still king. Schools stretched their budgets by using inexpensive, filling ingredients, and cabbage was about as cheap as it got. Hot dogs, mass-produced and affordable, were another easy protein option. When combined, they created a stew that could be ladled out in big portions to feed an entire cafeteria without breaking the bank. It was a dish born out of necessity, not flavor. For many kids, this meal became synonymous with Friday afternoons or those days when supplies ran low. Teachers and staff often encouraged students to eat it, reminding them that it's good for you, or this is what keeps you strong. Some children actually grew to enjoy the salty, hearty mix, especially those who came from homes where food was sometimes scarce. But for most, the soggy cabbage and rubbery hot dog slices were endured, not enjoyed. What made cabbage and hot dog stew unforgettable wasn't just its unusual taste, it was the way its smell lingered. Long after lunch ended, the odor clung to the walls, the hallways, and even the kids' clothes. Some remember being teased when they came home because their entire backpack carried that cafeteria scent. To this day, even a whiff of boiled cabbage can transport people back to those strange, humbling meals of childhood. And with that, we close our journey through some of the most unusual, fascinating, and downright strange school lunches of 1950s America. As we've seen, the school lunches of the 1950s were more than just fuel for growing kids. They were symbols of an America learning how to feed itself in a new age. From Spam sandwiches to Jell-O salads, every dish told a story of family traditions, government experiments, and the simple hope of making it through the day on a full stomach. Some of these foods are gone forever, while others live on in memory, whispered about at family reunions, or even rediscovered in retro cookbooks. For those who lived it, these lunches aren't just strange recipes. They are the taste of childhood, of cafeteria chatter, of a country that feels both far away and familiar. If you enjoyed this journey back in time, don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the America we remember. Your support helps us keep these memories alive and bring the past back to life, one story at a time. Until next time, may the clatter of trays and the laughter of friends remind you of just how sweet, and sometimes strange, the past could be.